In our last video, we explored the Android activity lifecycle, and we saw that we can override certain lifecycle methods, like onCreate when a method is created, onStart when it goes to a visible state, onResume when it goes to a state where we can actually interact with it, onPause when it leaves that state and goes to a pause state, onStopped when it leaves the pause state and is obscured from view, and onDestroy when the application closes. We also looked at Argo UML, and we saw that we could create a diagram that represents our program. And so in Argo UML, we have an activity, and we override that with GPS plant, and with advanced search activity and plant results activity. Today, what we're going to do in this video is explore how to request location updates from a GPS. And we're also going to see how we can use more methods. We know that we can override methods from a superclass, but we're going to look at some other ways that we can also engage with methods by something called an interface. So let's start by going to our GPS plant screen, and we're going to look at this onCreate method. Okay, in the onCreate method, we're going to want to engage our location manager. We're going to want to start getting GPS updates. If you remember what the screen for this looks like in the emulator, we have a little screen here, and we have a place for latitude and longitude. Our goal is to populate that latitude and longitude, but only when the screen is actually visible. When the screen is not visible, that's a computing intensive task that we don't really want to bother with as much. So what we're going to do, this is going to take a few steps. So what we're going to want to do is create a method called request location updates. And we're going to want to call that method from this onCreate method. First, though, we have to request the location service. And we can do this with a method. We'll do it right here in onCreate, where we do a lot of our initialization. We can do this with the method that guess what we can actually call. It's up on our superclass, but we can actually call it from here. And the method is getSystemService. Now remember, I told you we can override methods from a superclass. We can also very easily call methods from a superclass. And you might recall that I said hold Control-O, hit Control-O one more time, and that will show us all the methods that we can either call or override from our superclass. So if we look at get system, you see we have get system service. That's a method defined in the superclass activity or a superclass of activity, and we can either call or we can override it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type get sys and then hold Control and hit space, and we'll let that autocomplete. Get system service. Wow. Look at all these services that we have available to us. Accessibility, account, device, display service, all kinds of services. I'm going to choose location service, and I'm going to terminate with a semicolon. And then I'm going to put my cursor right on get system service. I'm going to hold Control and press 1. And why is that? Get system service gets a service from, guess what, the Android operating system, and makes it available to us. For it to be of any use to us, we're going to want to save it in a variable so that we can use it later. So let's say assign statement to new field. That will allow us to access this variable from other methods. Assign statement to new field. The only trick is this get system service can respond with a lot of different services, and it doesn't know what kind it's responding with. So it gives us a very generic type, which is object, which is going to be of no use to us. Let's change this to LocationManager, which is what it's actually responding with in this case. In the variable name, I'm going to type location, and notice that when I type something on line 24, it changes on line 24 and 39. LocationManager, just like that. Private LocationManager, LocationManager. So when I ask for a location service, I'm going to get back an object of type LocationManager, and I press enter. Now we have two red lines, and we know the rule is when you get a red line, fix it immediately. Don't keep going, fix it immediately. The top one is easy to fix. The Eclipse doesn't know which location manager we want to use, so a simple Control-Shift-O will resolve that, and there we go. There's our location manager. For the bottom one, we know that get system service wants to return an object, but we're actually saving it in a more specific subclass. Remember subclass. Location manager is a subclass. So we're saving it in a more specific subclass. That more specific subclass, as we know from looking at our URL diagram, a more specific subclass might have more specific methods that we want to use. So for that reason, we have to cast. We have to cast from object type to location manager type. So I'm going to leave my mouse cursor on this red line and hold Control and press 1, which will add a cast. And that tells it, I acknowledge that I'm getting back an object, but I know under the covers I'm actually getting back a subclass of object, and this subclass is a subclass called Location Manager. So let me put a few comments here. Okay, get the Location Manager as a system service, or from the system service, whatever you want to say. Save it into a field. Something like that's fine, and then we'll save. Okay, location manager equals get system service, location service. So we've now accessed the service. Now, before we forget, let's Control M, because this one's an easy one to forget if we don't do it right away. We need to also change the Android manifest to tell it that we're going to request permission for locations. So I click on the Android manifest. We'll give it a moment to refresh here. And we'll go to the UI view. And we can go to permissions. Let's go to permissions. And we'll say add. Now here's the important part. It has to be uses permission, not just permission, but uses permission. So we add uses permission, and then the name, we're going to say access course location. And we're going to add another one, uses permission. Okay. And this one, we're going to say access find location. And one more, uses permission. Finally, access mock location. So to use this GPS service, we have to have authorization from the user in advance. And we do that by adding manifest permissions. Okay, again, we click on Android Manifest XML, choose the Permissions tab, choose Add, and then we choose our permission from the drop-down. And what that will do is in the actual XML under the covers, it adds some uses permission tags. Okay. Now, what's the point of these uses permission tags? Well, if you've ever loaded an Android application, or many applications for that matter, you know, the very first screen gives you a warning and says, this application is requesting these permissions. And you as a user decide whether or not you want to continue to download and use the application or not. So when you download an application, you have an opportunity to determine if it's asking for too much. Is it trying to access your phone state? Is it trying to look at your calls? Is it trying to look at your text messages? And that's why the permissions are there, so that the user can determine if the application is asking for adequate information, or if it's going too far and asking for some information that it could use in a malicious way. So this is a security mechanism. In order to get these GPS updates, we have to tell the user that we're going to be requesting the user's location. This has two important ramifications. Number one, GPS data generally is free. Okay, GPS data generally is free, especially if it comes from satellites. It's generally free. Number two, think about that. Do you want your applications tracking where you are? Okay, do you want your applications tracking where you are? That creeps some people out. Other people, you tend to think, well, okay, I want it to know where I am so it can make suggestions based on my location. Usually, depending on the application, that's the camp that I fall in. I understand you want to make some suggestions based on where I am. For instance, with the Plant Places mobile app, in the search screen, you have a checkbox for native. Native means a plant natively grows in that area. It wasn't imported from some other geography. Well, obviously native depends on where you are. So this is the kind of thing where if you check native, it's going to try to require your GPS location to get a determination of where you are. So it can actually give you native plants for that area. A plant that is native to Europe probably is not native to North America, and vice versa. So that GPS will tell us where are you, and does that and what's native for that. Similarly, on the Plant Places mobile app, you can submit bloom dates. Once again, a bloom date in Chicago is different than a bloom date in Cincinnati. And going back and forth between the two cities, I found Chicago was usually about 3 days behind Cincinnati in blooms for the exact same plants, which was really cool because I like watching blooms, I like tracking their dates and getting pictures. If I missed one in Cincinnati, I could go to Chicago and get it 3 weeks later. So, but there again, that's something that's very much GPS specific, so there are good reasons for that. Another big ramification of this is if you track the user's location, if you use GPS at all, when you register your application on the Android marketplace, you have to, you cannot make it open for everyone. You have to at least set the maturity level as low maturity. So once you start using GPS, your application can no longer be marked for everyone, for an all audience. It has to be at least marked for low maturity. The reason is they want to make sure that the user is aware of what location tracking is. They don't want a location tracking on a game that a little kid's going to use and download, maybe without the parent knowing or something like that. So they want the user to be at least of the age where the user understands what GPS tracking means. So as soon as you as soon as you use GPS, you have to be at least at low maturity. So important things to consider. So we control M, and we know we're back here at our GPS a plant activity. And first we've requested the service. Okay, we've requested the service in our onCreate method. Next, what we're going to have to do is engage that service. Now, we can actually engage the service. Probably a better place to do it is honestly from the onResume method. Because here's why. Let's look at the Android Lifecycle again. Okay? And remember that before the screen becomes visible, it's going to invoke onResume. After the screen becomes invisible, it's going to invoke onPause. We want to start listening in the onResume. We want to stop listening in the onPause. But once we're paused, we can go back to visible again. And when we do, we're going to call onResume. Not onCreate, onResume. So let's start the GPS listening in onResume, turn it off in onPause. If onResume, that very same method, is called again, then we'll restart this GPS listening activity. Okay, so from the onResume method that I overrode before, we'll go ahead and leave the super call there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke a method called request location updates. Now this method hasn't been made yet, so it's going to redline. I'm calling a method that hasn't been made yet, so subscribe to location service. Okay. And since it's redlined, I can very easily control 1 and create this new method, and there we go. Okay. Now, in request location updates, I can subscribe to location service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if LocationManager, remember that guy? That's that variable I declared above. LocationManager, just like so. If LocationManager is not null, which we do with an exclamation and an equal, that's a comparison that says, are these two things not equal? So LocationManager not equal null means the variable LocationManager has an object assigned to it if we have gotten inside this if test. Gotten sounds wrong. That sounds grammatically not good. If we have, we'll leave it at that. Okay, so what that means is that we've assigned a value to that variable. We want to do a null check first. We want to do a null check like this first because we want to avoid a null, let me put that on a new line, null pointer exception, and save. Okay, location manager not equal null. There we go. Okay, next what we're going to do is we're going to request location updates. Okay, so we have to actually, once we have the location manager, we have to request updates. I'm going to say location manager dot request location updates. Okay, we see we have several method signatures available to us. So method signature is a method name followed by the parameters that we pass into that method. So I kind of like this one best. The second one. Let's see what else we have here. Long min time, float min distance, pending intent. This will work. Okay, request location updates. First of all, the provider. The provider is interesting because what we're doing is we're saying who do we want to provide us with this information. I'm going to say location manager. Okay, and we see we have network provider, passive provider, GPS provider. We have a few options. GPS provider is probably my favorite because what we can also do, we can also ask for our cellular network to provide us with this information. But number one, they may or may not charge for that service, so we have to be careful. Number two, it may not be globally available. GPS is Global Positioning System. If we're getting information from GPS satellites, then we're getting information that we can get anywhere in the world. On the other hand, if we go with our cellular network, we're getting information from cell tower triangulation. That means that we have to have cell towers to actually get our GPS information. What if we're in an area where we don't have network coverage? That means no cell towers, no cell tower triangulation. So there are two options. One is GPS with GPS satellites, which is free around the world. The other is via our cellular network, which uses cell tower triangulation. That may or may not have a cost associated with it, where GPS is free around the world, the satellites are free around the world. Cellular network may or may not have a cost, and we actually have to have cellular coverage to use cell tower triangulation. Now, the benefit of cell tower triangulation is it's very fast. Initially, when you get your initial request, it's very fast. For GPS, it sometimes takes some time to acquire a satellite. And what the phone will actually do is if you've recently used GPS, it will remember which satellite you were using or which set of satellites or roughly where you are, and it will use that as a starting point. Okay, so the very first time you request GPS might take a while. After that, it kind of remembers where you are, and future calls don't take as long. Okay, two thoughts on this, or a few thoughts on this. Number one, that means if you do write an app that uses GPS, the first few times you try to debug it, it might take a while to get a GPS satellite, and you might think that your GPS doesn't work. So that's a little bit tricky because that caught me a few times when I wrote a GPS-based application. I kept trying to debug, and it could take 10-15 minutes to get an initial satellite signal, especially because I was either inside my house or on a cruise ship, where honestly, side note, but I've done a lot of programming. I usually take a cruise. That's usually my annual vacation. Part of the reason I like cruises is because on the at-sea days, you have no interruption and you can absolutely focus. I've done a lot of work, a lot of programming on cruise ships before. But in any case, that's the downside of GPS, is that while it is globally available, while GPS satellites are globally available, it does take a while to acquire that first satellite. The other trick is if you make a move, if you move significantly, your phone still thinks you are where you used to be. Okay, and then it has to realize that you have changed and it needs to acquire other satellites. It needs to figure out where it is around the world. If I go to a different country, which because of my day job is a somewhat frequent thing for me, a few times a year, if I switch geography significantly, it usually takes my phone a while to figure out that I'm no longer in Ohio. That process often takes a while. What's really funny is I've gotten a GPS a lot of botanical gardens by going on cruises. And that's nice because on a cruise ship, I get to see a lot of different places, and I only have to unpack one time. The hotel actually moves and takes me to these places. But what's funny is because I'm in a different port every day, I'm many times hundreds of miles from the last port, and my phone takes a while to sync up. So usually, as soon as we're getting close to docking, what I start doing is I start refreshing my phone's GPS as quickly as I can. That way, once I get off the ship, the phone has acquired my location. That process can take a while. Now, there's another option that we use. So we know that cell tower triangulation is quick to get that first location, but it doesn't have it may not be globally available. Where on the other hand, GPS satellites are globally available, but a lot of times take a long time to acquire that first location. Many times we can have a compromise, which is the best of both worlds. And with the compromise, what it will do is it will use cell tower triangulation. It will use cell tower triangulation to acquire your GPS satellite and then use the GPS satellite from then on once you have the location. So that's kind of a compromise where you use the cell tower just to speed up that initial acquisition a of a GPS satellite, and then you use the GPS satellite thereafter. So that's a flip side. For me, I usually do use. Let's see, we'll go back to LocationManager, GPS provider. There we go. Now we have two parameters. You want to set at least one of these. It's going to say how frequently in milliseconds do you wish to get updates. Okay. I might say 1 minute. Okay, but remember this is in milliseconds. So what you want to do is you want to open a web browser, which I'll do in just a moment here. Let's see, we'll go back to our activity lifecycle. How about that? Open a new window and say 1 minute in milliseconds, and this is something that a lot of people have searched on before, so there you go, 60,000. Okay, so be aware that's in milliseconds, not in minutes or anything like that. Let's go ahead and change that min time to be 60,000. Okay. Min distance, you can either specify a minimum time or a minimum distance. I don't recall what the interval is for minimum distance, but I believe it's actually meters or fractions of a meter. I'm going to set it to 0. 0 means update as quickly as possible. 0 means update as quickly as possible. So we're getting GPS data from GPS. We're going to refresh every minute. We don't care about distance. So you typically want to set either a time interval or a minimum distance to update GPS. You can set either or both. Okay. If you set neither, or if you don't want to set one, just turn it to 0. 0 means as frequently as possible. So 0 for the time interval means as frequently as possible. 0 for the distance interval means as frequently as possible for the distance. I did, and when I initially set this up, I set both to 0. And that's when I showed a toast every time I got a new location update. And the toasts were going very, very quickly, very fast. So that's why I say you want to probably give it some kind of buffer. You don't want it to update as frequently as possible. You want to say only give me a new GPS location either after a minute has elapsed or this distance has elapsed. Finally, we have this thing called listener. Well, what that means is if the location has changed, it's going to call a method called onLocationChanged. It's going to call a method, and that method is called onLocationChanged. Okay, so let's say that I want to add that method to this class. We know that before we could start typing the method like on LOC, hold control space, and then it would allow us to override that method. Well, no luck this time, not yet at least. No luck this time. Okay, what we have to do, one second. Okay, there we go. What we have to do is we have to enhance our class a little bit. Let's go take a look at that diagram we were working with earlier. You see we have activity, GPS of plant, advanced search activity, plant results activity. Activity is very specific to user interface. Activity is very specific to user interface. Okay. What we want to do now is do some things that are specific to GPS. That'll be perfect for our GPS of plant activity, but our other activities don't really care about GPS. Things in the superclass should be common to all subclasses. If we have something specific to one class, it should not be in a superclass that all classes then have to deal with. What we're going to do now is use something called an interface. Not like a user interface, but an interface is a collection of method signatures. And this one is called LocationListener. LocationListener provides us with a set of methods, like I want to say LocationChanged or onLocationChanged. Just one moment, I'll verify that. Sure enough, onLocationChanged. And several other methods. Okay, onLocationChanged is one of them. Now what we can do is we can have a class implement this interface. Okay, and we'll just drop like this. And you see that now this interface, which is a collection of method signatures, this is now implemented by our GPS of plant activity. Okay, and that means our GPS of plant activity can very easily override the onLocationChanged method and several others. So take a look. Remember our magic trick. If I type onLO, hold control space, okay, onLocationChanged, we're hoping that it would give us an autocomplete to override the onLocationChanged method. Right now it will not. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to set up this construction where GPS of plant activity implements the interface called LocationListener. GPS of plant implements the interface called LocationListener. Okay, so to set this up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this public class GPS of plant activity extends activity, and I'm going to set up this dotted line now, this implements relationship with LocationListener. To do that, after activity, I say implements LocationListener and save. Whoops, looks like I typed an extra character there, and save. Okay. Oh, I know why. I had my hand on the wrong line. Now, so there we go. Now, a couple things we're going to want to do. First of all, LocationListener, we're getting a red line. We know when we get a red line, the first thing we want to do is fix that red line. So Control-Shift-O, organize imports. Now GPS of plant is giving us a red line, and this is interesting. The type GPS of plant activity must implement the inherited abstract method LocationListener on provider disabled. What that means is that if we set up this implements relationship here, any method that's defined in the interface must be overridden in the class that's implementing the interface. Okay, that's easy to do though. I'm just going to put my mouse cursor there, Control 1, and say add unimplemented methods and save. And we see that takes care of the red line. Additionally, it's going to give me a bunch of new methods like this one right here called onLocationChanged. And that for us is the most important of all of these methods. onLocationChanged is the most important method of all of these methods because, let me put some comments here, this method will be invoked when the GPS service informs us that our location has changed. And save. Okay, that means anything that we want to do, anything that we want to do that should be updated when the GPS position of our phone has moved. Let me rephrase that. We should do anything in this method. I don't like that either. I'm trying to phrase this in a way I like. Anything that we want to do that should be updated when the GPS position of our phone is moved, we must do in this method. So if our GPS moves, if our phone moves, and we want to update something, we have to coordinate that update in this method called onLocationChanged. Okay, and save. Before I get to that though, I still have one red line I need to take care of. Okay, LocationManager request location updates. We want to get it from GPS. We want to update at most once a minute. We don't care about distance. And now we have to provide to this method an object of a class, and that object must implement LocationListener. That object must implement LocationListener, because if it implements LocationListener, it's guaranteed to have all four of these methods. So what we're going to do here is we'll just pass a current an object of the current class. We'll pass a reference of the current object, which we can reference by using the variable this. So we use this, and then we save. Okay, we're getting closer. Deep breath, we're getting closer. Next, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to implement this onLocationChanged method and have it actually update our user interface when the location does change, so we'll see our latitude and longitude. So that's what we'll do next. With the onLocationChanged method, we are getting a parameter here of type location. And it's named arg0, which doesn't really make much sense. So let's rename that to all lowercase location. Okay. Now location, I can type get latitude. You see we have a get latitude method. I can put my cursor on it, Control-1, assign to new local variable. Well, let's assign it to a new field. What the heck? That's fine. Private double latitude, yeah, that's perfect. Now we'll say location.getLongitude. Okay. And again, Control-1, assign to new field, and longitude's perfect. Okay. So that gets us our latitude and our longitude. And next what we can do is we can update the labels here, latitude and longitude, on our GPS plan screen. Okay, we can update those labels. Looks like we don't have access to those labels yet in this activity. So allow me to hold Control and press M. And let's take a look at layout. And let's look at activity GPS plants. And let's find out what IDs we gave to our latitude and longitude labels. Probably take just a moment for this to load. Now it's loaded. Now this might be a little bit tricky because, let's see, next to latitude, earlier we placed a label next to latitude. I probably want to go look at the XML under the covers. So let's see. LBL latitude value and LBL longitude value. It looks like those are the two labels I want to populate. LBL latitude value, LBL longitude value. So we Control M, and let's go back and go to our GPS supplant activity. And let's go to that onCreate method, and let's get access to those two fields. So I'm going to say, just like we did here, find view by ID. Control space will autocomplete. r.id.lbl latitude value. That's fine. And then right below that, find view by ID. Again, control space to autocomplete. r.id.lbl longitude. LGL longitude label. Did we make a value for that? Well, hang on, maybe we didn't. 1 second. Well, looking at the layout, it looks like I violated one of my own rules, which is to give items on a layout a unique identifier other than text view 1. So, okay, what I want to do here is say I'm going to call this one LBL longitude value, and then I'll save. As soon as I save that, it's going to create a new constant for me. I can refer to that constant back in my onCreate method. We'll go back and try this again. r.id.lbl longitude value. There we go. Okay, so I just did not give it a very logical name. And again, that's one of my recommendations is as soon as you add an item to a layout, give it a logical name. Okay, let's save these as fields so we can access them within our application. Assign statement to new field. We'll call this one LBL, or we'll call it, yeah, that's fine, LBL latitude value. Okay, let's call it an edit text. I'm sorry, a text view, because it's read only, so it's a text view. Okay, Control 1 to cast. Add cast. Okay, second option, find view by ID, Control 1, assign to new field. Okay, we'll call it a text view. Okay, LBL longitude value, like so. And again, we're going to want to cast to type text view. Okay, there we go. Now that we have accessed these two components from our screen, we can populate them in the request location updates. Okay, so onLocationChanged, here we go. Now we'll say update our user interface. Okay, we'll say LBL lat control space to autocomplete LBL latitude value, set text. Okay, we have to do something a little bit tricky here. We have to do double quote plus latitude. That double quote will basically force latitude from a number type to a string type. LBL longitude value, set text. Okay, double quote plus longitude. Okay. And save. At this point, we should be all set. We still want to be able to turn off location updates when we're not on this screen. We also want to test this out using the DDMS. Both of those are good subjects that we will cover, but this video is getting a little bit long. We're past, I usually try to keep them around 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and we're getting beyond that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and I'm going to make a third part. This is so far the second of so far 3. We'll make a third part where we look at that DDMS and we see how we can actually simulate GPS location using DDMS. We'll also look at how we can override the onPause method to be able to unsubscribe from location service when we go to a different screen. So that's where we'll go next. A quick summary of what we did this time. We requested location updates with the GPS satellites 1 minute apart from each other. Don't care about distance. And when we get a location change, it's going to invoke a method in our current object. The method it's going to invoke is the one called onLocationChanged. We were able to override that method because we are implementing an interface called LocationListener. Implementing interface LocationListener. And we know that our GPS of plant activity extends and inherits from the class activity, but also implements LocationListener. So it has all of the methods or access to all of the methods from activity, but it also has access to all of the methods from LocationListener. So we'll leave it at that. We'll come back in the next video and we'll see the next step. At this point, fairly certain we're in good shape. Thank you.